Education, Youth, Sports and Culture, our very own Deputy Chief Education Officer, Mrs. Cecilia Smith. Welcome to the show, Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Ms. Eva.
Now, I know that we were live on Monday where Minister gave an update in terms of where we are in education, in providing the country with updates in terms of what the projections are that we're working on right now. Talk to us a little bit about perhaps some of the important points that you think we need to reiterate to the public.
Thank you very much. Pleasant good afternoon, viewers from warm Belmopan. Today's session, I hope to emphasize a little bit more details in terms of what our response action is looking like. In particular, I'd like to pay attention to the early childhood and primary and secondary sectors of the system. We understand that under normal circumstances, the students at these levels, tertiary as well, but we are focusing our attention at the ministry on those three levels right now. Under normal circumstances, those students would have been back in school. And given the situation, that is not possible. So what we're trying to do is to organize structures that will help them to stay engaged meanwhile they're at home, so that their learning continues even while they're not in the usual four walls of the classroom. We understand too that distance learning has to come in different forms, because we do have persons living in circumstances where they have access to high levels of technology. We have some that have access to low technology. So some form of technology, but not as the first group. And then we do have a sizable portion of our population that has zero access to technology. So there's no technology, and so we have to ensure that whatever systems we put in place, that we are trying our utmost best to reach the masses. And so at the pre-primary and primary levels, what we are trying to do is we're going to use online resources. The main platform would be the Ministry of Education's website, www.moe.gov.bz, and we are going to upload weekly lessons on that platform for students at the pre-primary, which is, as we know it, to be preschool, as well as primary. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to reformat those same lessons in a package that will be compatible for radio broadcast. So we are hoping to reach more students if we are able to produce the same set of instructional lessons to those that might be in rural areas, for example, that might not have easy access to internet or data, and so they can listening on the radio. It's not going to be anything that will keep them around the computer or around or listening to the radio all day. It's really going to be short lessons, 15 to 20 minutes per day per grade level. And so all the students will need to do is to pay attention to the broadcast schedule and tune in at that time and get the lessons for the day. And then there's one other group that we are going to try and reach, the students that don't have either access to data or to the radio. We're going to try and prepare some print resources. These print resources will be in line with what we are putting online and what we are broadcasting on the radio. So the students only need to get access to those print resources, and over the period of a week, 2 weeks, they can work through the lessons in the print resources that will become available to them. And that one, we will have to work very closely with our partners all over the country to make sure that we are able to get those print resources to people who really need the print resources. Because if those that have access to the online instructional guide, they wouldn't perhaps need to also get the print resources. We are not going to print for every single Belizean child. We're only going to print a percentage of booklets that we think we need, and so we're asking persons to help us make sure that the students who really need the print resources are the ones who actually get the print resources. That will be the case for preschool and primary school. In the case of secondary, the development work is a little bit more decentralized in that the schools are actually working on their continuity plan that will help them to continue to engage their students, because as you're aware, programs at secondary vary from school to school, and so each individual school is tasked to put their plans in place and to using the same framework. You have some students with high access to technology, you have some with little access to technology, and you have some with no access to technology. So the school has to also take that into consideration so that they're able to reach all their students at the secondary level.
Great. So while all of this, we're working on the way forward, perhaps it would be important to share where are these resources coming from? Who's behind organizing and creating all of these resources for our students out there?
Here's where I say shout out to the development team, right? We have organized ourselves at the ministry into working groups that are in charge of the different levels, and each working group, the childhood working group, the primary working group, the secondary working group, and I need to say here that secondary, the group that is responsible for secondary is also organizing how learning happens for the TVET institutions. But each working group has engaged a set of teachers who are working with us at a distance to produce whatever it is we need to produce. So right now, they are working tirelessly, putting together the radio broadcasts, whatever it is we're going to upload on the website, and whatever print resources we're going to produce. And so we have teachers and education officers that are working to do this.
Great. I know this morning we had the president of the BNTU on one of the morning talk shows, and a number of points were brought forward, but in particular there seemed to have been a few concerns from teachers in regards to school managers, school management asking for certain tasks and activities and tests to be done, if I'm not mistaken. Again, could we perhaps reiterate the ministry's position when it comes to assessments during this time of crisis?
The position varies from level to level. The ministry has taken up the mantle to organize how learning happens at the two lower levels, the pre-primary and the primary level, because really what we want to do for students during this time is just to keep them engaged in a way that they will continue to develop their thinking skills, their creativity skills, their social skills, and that type of a thing at home. We do not expect that students at this level will be assessed formally in any way during this period. It is the very reason why we have gone ahead and we have canceled the national standardized exams at this level, because this is not the time for that. We do want to keep them engaged, but we are not concerned about making sure that they get a particular grade on a particular subject at this time. And so what we want teachers to understand, school leaders and teachers to understand at these levels, the pre-primary and the primary level, is that what you can do at this time is you can make sure that you are in touch with your students. You can try to through whatever means necessary. I know it's difficult, especially for students that are in remote areas and without access to communication and that type of thing. But to the extent that you can remain engaged with them, encourage them to access the lessons that the ministry has made available to them. And if you have any other material that you would like them to focus on that reinforces certain skills that you have already taught, that helps them to think a little bit more, that challenges them a little bit more, that you would want them to practice and try out, then feel free to share that with them. But certainly at those two levels, the intention is not to engage them in any kind of structured, formal way so that they have to remain in front of a computer or behind some books or papers for extended period of time. One of the things we don't want to hear at these two levels is students working on major projects. When classes were called off in March, the ministry immediately opened up a hotline that would allow us to engage with the general population to find out how they're doing and what challenges they're facing, and all in with the intention of trying to help them to work through this difficult time. And many of the complaints that we received were for students at the primary level. They had to engage in some elaborate type of projects. They had to build solar systems. They had to, and none of that is necessary during this time. What we really want to do is to make sure that students continue to learn, but that they can continue to learn in a fun way, an interactive way, a way that will appeal to their senses during this time, because it is a difficult time. And so we want teachers to remember that. At the secondary level, it's going to be slightly different. We are dealing with adolescent learners there. They're a little bit older, a little bit more mature in most instances. And so schools are expected to continue to engage them, but while they engage them, they also need to make sure that they too are flexible, that they too understand the difficult circumstances that students have to work in. And so they need to make sure that if they're going to check for learning, and I'm very careful to say check for learning as opposed to assessment, because assessment carries a more formal connotation where there is a grade awarded. While we want to encourage them to check for learning, that they need to make sure they do so using flexible means. If I could make reference to the same hotline again, one of the complaints that we got several times was that students had to log on and they had to complete certain tests, certain quizzes, certain assignments. We got complaints that they had to actually log on for the entire day. Yes, there were breaks in between, but they were actually doing lessons the entire day. That's not what we are asking for. That's not how, that's not the science behind distance learning. And so schools need to be mindful of that. The circumstances now are more difficult than they were a month ago. And so while we want to ensure that there is checking for understanding and there is checking for learning, we want schools to understand that that should not be done using any kind of formal structured means. It should be done in a flexible way. If it means that you give them an entire week to say, try to complete this task by next week Tuesday, you know, that type of thing, to allow them sufficient time to get into the frame of mind to study and to do what it is you need them to do. So the variation has to happen because the group of learners that we are dealing with are at different levels.
Now, in terms of secondary school, there have been a few questions and concerns coming from parents in terms of the way forward. I know that secondary schools are governed by their own board,
or managing authority.
In terms of when we're looking specifically, we're at second form, there's a transition from second to third in terms of what areas of specialization these students ought to take. How are these things going to work out? Particularly when we will not be able to have final exams, what have you. Is there something, or what role does the ministry play now in assisting secondary schools in these aspects?
Well, I think the first thing to note is that we have indicated that we want students to transition from one grade level to the next. So from the very beginning all the way up to third form, we want them to transition from one class to the other. We don't want children to be left back or left behind because of the circumstances that we have no control over. So what that means is that when we get an opportunity to reopen, and perhaps even before that for the teachers and the managements of school, we have to organize ourselves to determine how it is we are going to address the fact that we have a group of students who are moving on to another class who may not have completed the entire year's curriculum in the way you had expected them to complete it. So you have to sit down and you have to look at the particular circumstances. I don't know that the ministry can provide specific instructions to schools because their programs are different, their circumstances are different, and so on. But each school has to look at its own particular case and determine how best it is going to address the situation in terms of how do I handle the students as they move to the next level. I can say that the transition from one level to another, for example, going from primary school to high school, there's a whole different change there. We know that there's no PSC going on again this year. But what we know is that that exam has already been printed. And so what we are going to do is we're going to share that with high schools. So wherever the students are registered for high school, the high school will be able to give them the school level. It's not going to be national level again, a school level test to check for what competencies they were able to master at the point when they left primary school. It is hoped that the schools will use the data from the test to then come up with an appropriate intervention plan to help those students transition into first form. And that's really what exam results should be used for anyway. I know it's kind of overrated and the way in which the society speaks or describes these exams, perhaps even the ministry at times, but what we really need to do is to look at test results and to analyze the results in such a way that it informs us what should be our next teaching plan. So if I find that a student is not showing that he has mastered certain competencies, then it means my teaching plan for that student has to be taking him or her from the point where he or she is at. It can't be just, I give a test, oh, you did well, oh, you didn't well, and then I teach as usual. Okay. So the ministry will take time now. The primary schools in particular might be familiar with what I'm saying because for some time now, the ministry has been spending a tremendous amount of time, the exams unit, to help schools at the primary level to understand the results of how to analyze the BJAT results. Excuse me, the BJAT results. The BJAT is an exam offered at mid-cycle, and so what happens is that the ministry organizes session that helps schools to understand how to analyze those results so that when students move on to the next division in primary school in standard 4, that schools are able to teach in response to the results that they receive for a particular year. So that type of thing has to now happen at high school. When they transition from primary to secondary, the results of that test then has to be used to inform how the first form instructional plan would look. Now more than ever, because we know that the students did not complete primary school in the way we had expecting they would complete primary school. So that has to happen first form. It also has to happen in third form when they're going on to fourth form as well. Schools need to then sit together. The administrative team, the management team has to sit together to determine what they need to put in place at that level to deal with the situation at their schools.
There's quite a lot to discuss, and as we are having our conversation, we are getting quite a lot of questions. I'm not sure if you wrapped up on everything you wanted to talk about before we get into the actual question and answer segment of the show.
I just wanted to make some comments for teachers with respect to how we are handling certain processes that has to continue even while they are not in school and even while our offices are closed. One of the things that has to continue is processing of application for licenses. There are different types of licenses, as you know, and a teacher to remain employed has to have a valid license. So if a teacher is in a position now where his or her license is about to expire, then a submission for a renewal or an extension on a particular license still has to happen. And the way in which we are going to do that now, since our offices are not open, is we are going to ask teachers to prepare their application packages, which is usually a form with some supporting documents depending on what type of license they're seeking, and they are going to submit those electronically to the manager, the district education center manager for each district. There is perhaps one piece of document that we normally require an official document, meaning that it should be in a sealed envelope, which is normally a transcript or the progress report if it is that they're applying for a special permit or an extension on their license. The chief education officer has indicated earlier this week in another forum that we are going to talk to the institutions, the local institutions that offer training programs for teachers, to ask them to reroute those documents directly to the ministry so that teachers don't have to be concerned about getting those. But other documents they should have access to, and all they would need to do is to upload it and send it to the district manager. And when we get through this whole process, we are going to ask them to bring in the original documents later on. So there are 6 managers in the 6 districts, and depending on which district they are in, I'm sure they know the particular email address for the manager in charge of that district. The other piece of thing that teachers need to know is that in addition, and this is teachers at all levels, in addition to the fact that we want them to work with us to help support the students while they're at home, we also want them to pay attention to their own professional development. And so during this period, the ministry will offer, in the first instance, at least 2 online professional development sessions for teachers. One of them is focused on psychosocial support for teachers. It is a difficult time, and we are concerned about the well-being of teachers, and so we're going to organize a training session that focuses on that area. And then the other one has to do with helping teachers to transition to online learning. It's not black and white, and it's not the same as I teach you in a face-to-face session, and so I can just use that and teach you by distance. The science is a little bit different, and so we have a training session that will focus on helping teachers to understand how to do that. Both of these sessions are going to be offered to teachers at all levels, and teachers can register for these online sessions once they are made available. I think what we will do is we will upload the information to the ministry's website as well as the ministry's Facebook page. They're not yet available, but they should be, the registration portal should be ready by early next week. Teachers would need to have access to their BMIS number, the Belize Education Management Information System number, and there is a number that they can contact if they are not sure what their BMIS number is. They can send a text or call 631-4450. And that number again is 631-4450. That is for a teacher who doesn't know what his or her BMIS number is. They can get assistance at that number. If they don't have a BMIS number, because we have teachers who are perhaps not teaching at this time, but would still want to participate in the sessions, if they have a teacher's license number, they will be able to register with that as well. So wanted to make sure teachers understand that they need to make sure they maintain a valid teaching license even during this period, and then in addition to their normal duties of supporting students, they need to make time to support themselves. Are those the only 2 PD sessions teachers can do during this time? No. If a teacher or a school or a group of teachers identify some other professional development opportunity that they are interested in, all they need to do is to perhaps share that with the TEDS office within the ministry. They have an email address which is TEDS, TEDS, @moe.gov.bz. TEDS will take a look at what it is you're interested in and will determine if what you are interested in doing is suitable for professional development hours that you can use towards maintaining your license. So you're not just restricted to the 2 online sessions that the ministry will offer. You can also look at other areas of interest that you might find useful and beneficial to your own professional development.
All right. So let's get into some of the questions, the more pressing questions now. Will there now be a concerted effort by the Ministry of Education to utilize the use of information technology, tablets, computers, smartphones in enhancing online education?
Of course. I've heard the expression numerous times that there is no normal again. We have to think about it. There's a new normal, and we have to be mindful of that. As educators, we understand that we have to grow, we have to develop, we have to be flexible, and so this has, in a sense, forced us to jump to this next level, perhaps much quicker than we were anticipating. But it is what it is, and so we have to be responsive and we have to look at how we can transition into using the technologies that are available to us. We don't have any policy or protocols in place for distance learning, and I believe that is why when we tried distance learning in mid-March, there were quite a bit of hiccups. We were only trying for the first time in most instances, and so we have to do that. We have to set the structure, the framework in place that will guide schools in how to go in how they will go about setting up their own system at the school level. But certainly we have to. We can't not do that. We have to.
This next question, it's in twofold. Now, there are 2 separate questions, but all relating to the issue of registration, because the situation is so fluid and we have no idea when school is actually going to reopen. There are several questions in regards to how is it now that the registration process is going to work. In the first instance, there's a question asking about the Social Security Board, if there can be some communication with those folks over that side in terms of allowing parents to get birth certificate. You know, for registration purposes, you would need to have these documents. What is the role that we're going to play to try and assist parents in that regard, or a Social Security card at that? And the second question is asking about how are students going to be registered for the new school year, particularly because we don't know when schools are going to be reopened?
Well, the first part of that question is simple. The schools would have been registering students by now at all levels. I know some secondary schools opened their registration system from as early as January. And then the bulk of it would be happening now between April to June. Clearly, that has to be adjusted. So I know some schools are open to online registration, where they would go to a particular portal that the school has set up, and they would just input certain information. Of course, they wouldn't be able to complete the full registration in terms of submitting the original documents and so on, but they would have at least inputted their basic biodata for the students. But not all schools can do that. A few schools can do that, and if they can do that, then we would encourage that. But the masses would have to extend their registration period to even up to the point when we are reopening. And they would have to allow parents to come in and register at a later time. We can't require parents to go out to pick up documents that from certain agencies. For example, they might need the birth paper from Vital Statistics. If it is that they have to travel great distances to get, we can't do that now. So schools will have to make sure that their registration processes are so flexible that they will allow parents to bring in material or bring in information or bring in documents that they need to bring in at a later point, even after the school year has started.
All right. We have two other questions in regards to the registration process. What is in place for registration for the next school year, especially for students enrolling in Infant 1?
It's going to be, it has to be a school by school response. The ministry has never taken charge of registration for any school. Every school has its system in place for registering students. The only thing the ministry can do at this point is to ask schools to make sure that whatever registration procedures they have set up, that those procedures are so flexible that parents will have sufficient time to get their students in school when we get a chance to reopen, whenever that is.
All right. Moving on to secondary, can you please clarify the CXC examinations? The regional body proposed a strategy. Is the MOE saying that no matter what strategy CXC gives, Belize will not participate in those examinations for this academic year?
I don't know that the ministry has said that. I believe what the ministry has said is that this regional body that administers this exam is in the process of finalizing what its plans are. And the way that body does that is to engage all the member states. So Belize has already submitted its position on certain issues that we need to address. I know many of the other territories have. I think what CXC needs to do now is to come to the point where they're finalizing what that would be, and so that all member states are in fact comfortable with what the final decision would be. I think what was said in the earlier discussion this week was that we are not going to participate in the CXC as they were expected to be administered, which is no,
right.
Because under the old normal, we would be having CXC exams now. It starts April, May, June, and clearly we can't do that. So that we are not participating in, but we are going to participate in whatever the final decision turns out to be. And I believe that we will find that out very soon, because we are at that point where we need to come to a decision. But it's not going to be a Belize decision. It has to be a regional position that all member states will be comfortable with.
Right. How will the acceptance process be made for high school? Some students have not at this time been able to send in applications. What would be the next move?
They have to still, depending on whichever high school they're interested in, there is a way to make contact. They make contact with particularly the principal of the school, or the school might have a number that they can reach. Perhaps one of the things the ministry can do is to upload on our Facebook page and on our website a contact detail for each school. Make contact with them to indicate that you're interested in enrolling in the school, and then you go from there. The matter of the school being flexible to allow you to still register at this time, or even later than now, is something that the ministry will continue to champion. But the parent has to make contact with the school first.
Right. Is it okay for private schools to have online sessions from 9:30 to 1:30, plus doing online graded assessments? I know we've been speaking quite a lot about schools who continue to operate under these guidelines. Perhaps a reminder?
Yes. We want schools to remember that the science behind online teaching and learning is different from face-to-face traditional teaching and learning. It's different. So while in a traditional setting you can expect students to be seated for, well, I don't know that you can expect it, but we do, for extended periods of time, because the social aspect is there and so they can be engaged in different ways. You can't replicate that online just like that.
Right.
So it's not advisable. The circumstances we're living in at this time is difficult. If we go back to the basics, we are aware that there are many households that perhaps don't even have to eat at this time. That other things are their priorities. And so schools need to be mindful of that. Students should not be penalized if they're unable to respond in that manner. And so when a student is unable to respond, then the school should make sure that they respond to the particular needs of those students. And that is why the ministry has the hotline remain open. Because where there are instances where you feel that you are not coping, then we're encouraging you to call the ministry's hotline so that we can intervene and we can remind schools what it is they should be doing at this time. What they should really be doing is supporting learning and not enforcing learning. It's difficult to do that during this time. So if I can repeat those numbers,
just going to say.
There are two numbers for that hotline, and it's 615-7597, and the other one is 615-7402.
Great. Our next question is asking about private schools and whether or not private schools have the power to enforce school fees, the payment of school fees.
I think the response has to be the same. Schools, whether public schools or private schools, need to understand that the circumstances are not the usual circumstances that we're accustomed to. And I understand that we still have overhead costs, we still have salaries to pay, we have bills to pay, but so do our students and the parents who have to support them too. So we have to strike a balance, and we have to think about ways in which we will work with parents. In my mind, enforcement is such a harsh term at this time. I think what we really need to focus on is working with the individual cases. So if it means that you have to set up some form of a payment plan that will extend even beyond now, so that you can make sure that you still collect what it is you need to collect, but that it is done in a fashion that is more practical and doable for the students and their parents, then do that, work with them. But I think to try to enforce anything at this point is very harsh, and it says that we are not paying attention to the psychosocial aspect of development. True education should be well-rounded, and it should not be focused on just the academics. It should not be just limited to what we see on a day-to-day basis. It has to consider the context in which our students learn. And so if it is that a school is not doing that, then we need to remind them. So again, I call on the hotline, and the ministry will try to see how best we can intervene.
Now, for the most part, I've observed quite a number of schools have been using their social media platforms to send updates, to send information, to keep in contact with their student body. What about those schools who have not made any attempts?
Well, using social media for good reason, in a positive way, is excellent. If you have access to it, then use it. There are some schools that it would not help them to use it at this time because the target audience, their students are perhaps not on social media. So they would be speaking to other people. So schools have to use what medium they know will work for them. I know at the secondary level in particular, and I suppose other levels can also do it. One of the things we have encouraged them to do is to do a survey to find out what medium your students and the parents that you serve, what is the more popular medium, and be mindful that the ones that are not using any medium, then you have to think of ways in which you can reach them. And so there is no right or wrong about using social media as long as you use it for the right purpose and as long as you know that not everybody is on social media, so you must use multiple means.
And that's the point I was about to get at. It's not a matter of just using social media, but we applaud those schools who have made the effort, but there are schools who have yet to make contact with their student body. I think that's very important during a crisis.
Right, and you would think that by now they would have made contact because if we weren't in this situation, they would have been in school this week.
Right.
So, they need to begin to make contact if they have not already done so.
Do you think it's a good idea to have tutor students online that need the extra help for kids that are behind during this time?
There is nothing wrong with additional tutoring in whatever form or fashion. Can't be for extended periods of time. I wouldn't recommend that. But yes, if you know that you can reach students in that way, the infrastructure is there, by all means, go ahead and use it.
Another question is asking about the specifics in terms of the requirements for promotion to a new class, or will all students automatically be promoted?
The promotion will happen automatically for all students up to third form, from preschool all the way up. What we expect to happen again is this, and I've heard mixed messages, I've seen different perspectives on this, but our bottom line is that we don't want students to be kept back because of a circumstance that is beyond their control. So what we want to happen is once the students are promoted to the next level, what we expect schools to do is immediately to do some form of an assessment to see where the students are. And the ministry's own plan, the supervision and support plan that the ministry has in place will have to be adjusted so that when we get back into school, we are actually supporting schools in a different way to help them to understand where their students are and then what type of intervention they need to do to get those students ready for the next level. It's going to take a little bit of time. That transition period will be critical, but that needs to happen, and the ministry will be there to support schools in getting that done.
In terms of preparation, I know that we continue to work across the education sector at different levels to meet the needs of our students, but what of those students who are differently abled? What type of support has the ministry been doing?
Similar, we have our special education unit who has been working to try to organize ways in which they can support these students. If we're going to be honest, we know that it is a challenge to support them even when things are running according to the way we expect them. I'm trying not to say the word normal anymore. So clearly, we are challenged to give them that type of support now, but there are things we can do, and our unit is organizing itself to make sure that those things happen and to make sure that the students are supported the best way we know how. Some of it we would have to reach out to our partners that also do offer support at home, because some of it we are unable to do. It goes outside of our purview as the Ministry of Education, but there are things that we can do, and we have a unit that is working to make sure that we also pay attention to those students who need that extra assistance during this time.
There is a question about the sitting of the AdLib exam. I know everything has been on a pause, so AdLib results are not going to be forthcoming right now because those have not been marked. What does a fourth form student do in the interim? I think most universities use that as a guide for entry into select math or English courses.
I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here. I'm not as involved with the transition to tertiary. But I believe that a similar philosophy that happens with the transition from standard 6 to first form will have to happen with fourth form to junior college, or the next level, tertiary level. So while the results would be delayed, I imagine that they would, be able to put those together in some form or fashion later on, that the schools will not rely solely on those at this time. And I think I've heard a number of tertiary level institutions already indicating that we are not just going to wait for that. We can't just wait for that. We have to look at other things that will tell us whether or not, students are able to make matriculation for certain programs that they offer. So that will have to be dealt with in a similar way.
Internally. If the pandemic extends for a few more weeks, does the ministry have a date when to make the decision to, in fact, call off the entire school year?
The ministry's decision on calling off the school year or when we reopen will be guided by other factors, particularly health-related factors. We want to make sure that when we get our students back together, that they are going to be safe. So it's not going to be a decision that is made by the Ministry of Education alone. We would have to dialogue with the other partners, and then based on that discussion, based on whatever information they have to share, then we will make a decision at that point. The minute we do, it will be communicated formally to the public, so everybody will be alerted. And I don't imagine it will be a case where Friday evening we get and we announce, okay guys, we're going to start back school, Monday morning, get back to class. It's not going to be like that. We're going to make sure that there is a proper transition plan in place.
All right, as we are winding down, Mrs. Smith, could you talk to us a little bit about the rural areas, Toledo District in particular, where we know there's not access to internet as we would have it here. What plan does the ministry have to maximize efforts that would ensure that kids within this district would, of course, eventually have access to education and actually be able to use the resources that we're working so hard to deliver to them?
Well, I think when we realized we needed to do some print resources, we're actually thinking about those students. Not just the ones in Toledo. We have students in remote areas in several parts of the country. We know that they would have no access to the technology that is popular in urban areas. And so we will make sure that we liaise with the appropriate partners in those areas. I think one of the easiest ways to reach students all the way out there is to work through the local authorities, the village councils, because they are still there out there in the communities to help us to get the learning packages out there. That's a quick way to do it, an easier way to do it. So we haven't sorted out all the logistics yet. We are hoping to get that done this week. But all our plans we feel will be ready for launching by Monday. So Monday, everybody can check the ministry's website for those who are going to access the material that way. Everybody can begin to listen to the radio. We are going to indicate which radio stations we're using because it varies from district to district. And you will get a schedule of what will be aired at what time. All of that will kick off on Monday. And the same is true for the print resources. We're going to have those ready for next week, and we are going to make sure that we try to send them to all parts of the country that needs them. And that is why I tried to say earlier that if you know you have good access to the technology, please don't try to get the print resources as well, because we really want to use that for the people who don't have access to the technology.
If we could spend the remainder of the time talking a little bit about the resources, the radio broadcast, and the those that can be found on our website. Talk to us a little bit about grade level. What exactly areas or topics can our parents look out for?
Well, there are going to be 5 segments daily for the radio broadcast. There's going to be a segment for preschool, which would be broad-based enough that it will cover, it will appeal to students who are both in level 1 and level 2 at the preschool level.
Can I just ask, and I'd want for you to confirm that all of these broadcasts are going to be locally produced, right?
Yes, we have a group of, and I hope they don't get offended when I say this, we have a group of amateur professionals that that makes sense. They're doing a good job in my mind. They're doing an exceptional job, but they have not done this before, and they've gone through some quick training, and they are going to produce, it's actual teachers that we have in the system, and some education officers who have been working day and night trying to record, and I don't like how this song, and they try again, and so it's going to be interesting. I think what we like is that the voice that they will hear is going to be a local,
right,
a Belizean voice that our students will understand. But if I can get back to the structure, yes. There are going to be 5 segments on a given day. So the first segment is going to be for preschoolers, for children ages 3 and 4. The next segment is going to be for lower primary, for those students who are in infant 1 and infant 2. And then the third segment is going to be for standard 1 and standard 2. And then the fourth segment for standard 3 and 4. And then the final segment for standard 5 and 6. Now, what we can say is that the instructional plans were developed based on material that is in the curriculum, the learning outcomes from the curriculum. So it's not coming from out of the thin air. It's grounded in our curriculum framework. But quite a bit of it is not intended to teach entirely new concepts, because we realize that there are students who will be working through these things independently at home. Many of them will have some adult supervision that will be able to assist them as they go along, but many of them will not. And so the idea then is not for them to become unduly stressed, right, because they are learning something that is entirely new. That is not to say that there will not be some opportunities to provoke thought and to help them to do some critical thinking and that type of thing, but that will be done in a way that they can work through those sessions independently. And they're not going to be long sessions. Right. Each segment is going to be the older students get lessons in the basics, math and language arts and so on. Each lesson is going to be about 15 minutes. So it's not going to be for an extended period of time. What parents will need to do is to get a hold of the schedule, and then they can identify the time when the lesson will come on for their student, and then they stick to it. We're going to ask the radio stations to make sure that they keep to a routine, so that they can tune in Monday to Thursday. There is going to be none on Friday, but the radio stations are free to replay any of the lessons from Monday to Thursday on the Friday. But in terms of a new lesson, we are going to produce them for 4 days of the week only.
We're wrapping up now. Mrs. Smith, is there anything you would want to end off with that you think is important for our viewers and listeners?
I think I would merely want to end off by saying that we need to make sure that our first priority is keeping safe. We know what has been the message so far. We've been going at this for 4 or 5 weeks now. So we know the message about proper hygiene. We know the message about social distancing. But essentially what we need to do is to do our best to keep safe, to keep sane, meaning we take time out to relax, to breathe, to try to pace ourselves as we handle the emotional stress that comes with what we're going through. And for the children of Belize and the adults who are listening, that we allow them to be children. We allow them to have fun during this time. It's enough for them to have to take on the emotional stress that some of them are taking on. Please allow them some time to do that. I think that is going to be one of the critical things that we have to bear in mind for us to get through this, and get through this in a way that we can, get back on track easily. We are a resilient people. Our children are resilient. I know many people are concerned that, oh my goodness, they're not getting all the lessons that they're supposed to be getting and they're going to be behind. And no, in my view, if we respond to them properly when we get them back to school, we will be able to get them on track in no time. Our children are resilient children, and even the ones that are challenged with learning, if we give them the additional attention that they need, they will get on track.
Just a final question that just came in terms of some of the functions of TEDS. Is there something in the making that would allow them to upload a list of sites for teachers that they could access CPD hours?
Yes, I believe they are working on that. I'm not sure at which point they will be able to publish that, but I know from speaking to the director of TEDS that they are working on compiling resources that teachers can access that would be good for maintaining their licenses. Yes.
All right. So I guess we have come to the end of this edition of our show. I want to extend a warm thank you. It's been so nice to see you, Mrs. Smith. I know we've been teleconferencing and what have you, but there's nothing like that face-to-face, and I think that is something that it's a lesson that we're learning from this unfortunate crisis. So thank you for being a part of today's conversation. I want to take the time out just to remind our viewers out there and our listeners, if it is that you need to contact the Ministry of Education for concerns or queries, whatever the situation might be, if you are a parent, if you are a managing authority, please reach out to us at 615-7579 or 615-7402. And of course, I have to take this opportunity to welcome our viewers to the Ministry of Education's website. You can get us at www.moe.gov.bz. You can also find us on YouTube at Belize, MOEYSC, and of course our Facebook account, Ministry of Education, Youth, Sports and Culture. Thank you so very much for your questions. Remember to practice social distancing, keep yourselves and your families safe by staying at home. Regularly wash your hands, cough and sneeze in your elbow or in a tissue and throw it away right away. If you have any more questions or concerns, of course, we have the toll-free hotline for the Ministry of Health at 1-800-MOH-CARE, and of course, our website, www.covid19belize for update and information. Until then, please stay safe, Belize.